So, if you're here for part two, then you really love Pandora and the Flying Dutchman, because I just have a lot to get through, a lot to read, but it is definitely worth watching this video because, as I said previously, there's a lot of interesting history. So, let's dive right in. Let's start with Ava Gardner's autobiography, and I'll read some really interesting things that she had to say about making this spectacular film. So she says, "I have to admit, I was fascinated by Spain from the first. I felt a kinship with the flamenco," which I don't know if anyone noticed, but I have a flamenco dancer right there that I actually bought that when I was living in España for a little bit. It was alive then and pure. The bullfights made for beautiful, exciting pageants, as did the fiestas, when everyone dressed up in those wonderful costumes. It was all wonderful, and it went on all day and all night. I loved it. So she goes on to say, "I wasn't in Spain just a gawk, of course. I had a picture to make, and one with a quite unusual plot. I played Pandora Reynolds, a 1930s playgirl, loved by many but never touched by love herself, driving men to distraction but a perfect stranger to personal happiness. During the course of the film, three very different men fall in love with her: a celebrated bullfighter, the world's fastest race car driver, who," and she puts in parentheses, "who Pandora in a typical whim refuses to consider marrying until he pushes the vehicle in a question off a goddamn cliff, and a mysterious yachtsman, Hendrik van der Zee, played by James Mason, who Pandora stumbles upon during a nude midnight swim in the bay. That yachtsman, it turns out, is the celebrated Flying Dutchman," and she explains the plot very well here. "A 16th century sea captain who got himself in a big trouble with the powers that be by first murdering his wife for unfaithfulness without giving her so much as a chance to prove her innocence, and then blaspheming against God for making women so fair and so treacherous. As punishment, he was doomed to live a ghostly existence, sailing alone on the seas and of the world. Every 7 years, he was permitted to live among men for a short period of time, and if he was able to find a woman who loved him enough to give up her life for him, his punishment would end and he would be permitted to die. Can the carefree Pandora Reynolds fall in love and become unselfish enough to fill that rather tall order? Honey, do you even have to ask?" Honestly, Pandora's character probably is exactly how Ava Gardner was, just full of life, carefree, loved attention from men. Ava Gardner loved men. So many stories about Ava Gardner and just plenty of different men. Anyway, so she's talking about the director here. Al was famous, if that is the right word, for asking for an ungodly number of retakes. Painstaking as he was, Al caused nowhere near the problems for me that toreador turned actor Mario Cabré did. That's the bullfighter. Mario played Juan Montalvo, my bullfighting lover, in the picture, and his ambition was to continue the role in real life. Unfortunately, Mario got carried away, confusing his onstage and offstage roles. In every country in the world, you find men who are pains in the ass. Mario was a Spanish pain in the ass, better at self-promotion than either bullfighting or love. Yes, Mario was handsome and macho as only a Latin knows how to be, but he was also brash, conceited, noisy, and totally convinced that he was the only man in the world for me. Now, everyone else in the world seemed to know that I was totally in love with Frank Sinatra, and no one else but Frank Sinatra. We suffered agonies trying to tell each other how much we loved one another during the first weeks of filming, with what the hours it sometimes took for a transatlantic calls to come through and the faraway voice at the bottom of the bathtub once the connection was made. But Frank supplemented his affection with daily letters and telegrams. And we had arranged before I left that he would travel to Tulsa for a 2 or 3 day visit. This all sounds very reasonable, but reason didn't always rule my actions in those days. I made a single mistake, and it turned into a blunder of major proportions because after one of those romantic, star-filled, dance-filled, booze-filled Spanish nights, I woke up to find myself in bed with Mario Cabré. That was the one and only time. I don't know if I believe her when she says that, because I'll tell you why in a second. Not that it mattered, because Mario was ready, willing, and all too able to broadcast his good fortune to the entire free world. Someone had passed on to him the concept that there is no such thing as bad publicity. If you want to be famous, you've got to get into the headlines. And what greater opportunity could you have in an attempt to replace Frank in my affections? His motivation was cynical self-interest. His declamatory rhetoric about the great passion in his life, his love for me and mine for him, made headlines in Spain, America, and all over the world. And that's all he cared about. He gave interviews saying I was, quote, the woman I love with all the strength in my soul, wrote the most idiotic love poems imaginable, and then marched off to recite them at the American Embassy in Madrid. Initially, I suppose, I thought this was vaguely amusing. And since we played lovers in the same film, no one was exactly encouraging me to come out and publicly say he was a nuisance and a jerk. I wouldn't really say they were lovers in the movie. They were old lovers in the movies. She had no interest really for him in Pandora and the Flying Dutchman. Anyway, but when he started to involve Frank in his shenanigans, saying he would not leave Spain alive, he would not leave Spain alive, as in Frank would not leave Spain alive if he came on that visit, Mario became a major pest. As the guy hardly ever left my side and was constantly warning me of his intentions, I took Mario's threat seriously. To him, my feelings were of little consequence. He was sure a woman would naturally fly into his arms of the stronger, dominant male, and that he could believe that sort of crap was typical of the man. Still, I think poor Alan Lewin was a little nervous too, the director. Because when Frank did fly in to see me in early May, Al saw to it that Mario was involved in some second unit shooting many miles away in Gerona, which is where they filmed the bullfighting scene. In fact, I will note that the bullfighting scene was filmed at, I believe they used a private bullfighting area, and they purchased the bulls for this movie. And the bulls had extremely sharp horns, unusually sharp, and Mario really risked his life filming those scenes. Okay, so though we were hounded as usual by the press, Frank and I enjoyed our 2 days of romance in Tossa del Mar, and I looked forward to more than when I would be in London for exteriors on Pandora, and Frank would be in concert for a week or so at the Palladium. But Mario had scenes in London too, and he and his 4 members of his bullfighting team were also there too. By this time, perhaps because he feared his fame might plummet as quickly as it had risen, Mario's demands for publicity had ballooned beyond reason. He went so far as to refusing to go out to the MGM studios for his scenes unless I was with him. I sputtered to Al Lewin, but he wants me to go in the damn car with him even on days when I'm not working. Al nodded, sighed, and patted my arm. Be a good girl, Ava. Go with him. Humor him. Let's get the goddamn movie finished. And then we can get rid of the son of a bitch. Do it for me, Ava. I did it for Al, and Mario was finally getting the message. His English was negligible, and London did not smile on phony lovesick matadors. He left London, and thank God I never saw him again. When I headed back to Hollywood, whatever regrets I had about leaving Europe behind had absolutely nothing to do with him. And that's how she ends that chapter. Now, as I'll get to in a second, I don't believe everything she says because other people on the set had different things to say, which I'll read in this book right here, which I highly recommend. It has so much amazing, interesting. I won't be able to get to everything on this movie because there's so much in this book. It's called Ava Gardner, Love is Nothing by Lee Server. So let's get to the stuff I want to talk about. Okay, so Jack Cardiff, as I mentioned, he was the cinematographer, had this to say when he met Ava. We met at her hotel, and she was very nice and, of course, very beautiful, with a wonderful, sexy voice and an extraordinary way of moving like a cat. And almost the first thing she said to me was, "Jack, you have to watch how you light me when I'm having my period." It was rather disarming, but that was Ava, just very natural and frank about everything. I mean, she said it just as you would say, "Watch me when I have a bad cold." I told her, yes, I would try to watch out how I lit her on those days. Yeah, Ava sort of just didn't care. I guess when you're that beautiful, you can just get away with anything. So Jack also said this. Of course, Lewin, the director, thought Ava was a goddess. He thought she was the most beautiful woman in the world, and he used to just gaze and gaze at her. And we would shoot her, and he would say, "I want to do another close-up, closer," and we would do that. And then he would say, "Let's do another one, different angle." Then one more, closer, and on that, and on like that. It became it became that all we were doing was close-ups of Ava Gardner's face. He couldn't stop himself, and the continuity girl, Angela Allen, had to make notes and coordinate what was being shot, and she'd say to me, "I don't know what he's shooting. Where is he going to cut in all these shots? There's nothing like that in the script." But he was so enthralled with Ava, and he just adored doing all of those close-ups of her. I mean, I don't blame him. I probably would have done the same thing. And you'll see Ava's costumes, her dresses are just amazing. They're very colorful, and they just work perfectly on her. And honestly, I don't think I've seen a movie where her outfits and she's ever looked so beautiful than this movie, especially with the Mediterranean Ocean as her backdrop. Now, let me see. And now, actress Jeannie Simmons had this to say. "If you've ever been to a bullfight, you know it's a rather dramatic atmosphere. The pageantry and the sound of the trumpeters, and, well, she saw, as in Ava, she saw Mario in his costume, his suit of lights, and waving his cape and his sword, and I think she was very impressed. And to see him bravely standing up to this great bull, it gave her a different impression of him, I suppose." She goes on to say, oh, this is interesting because she has one of Mario's little poems that he had written to Ava. "The night was of one color, yet when she came the sky held a rainbow, for Ava was the dawn." She would recall it was a one night only. Oh, this is when Jeannie Simmons is talking about Ava. She would recall it as a one night only, single mistake. We just read that. But others remembered a more lingering relationship. At first, recalled Jeannie Simmons, all communication between the two was in sign language, since Cabré did not speak English. Parentheses, his lines in the film were memorized. It was said parrot fashion. Mario spoke to her in Spanish, and Ava spoke no language except American. That's literally what she said. Ava said to me, "I'm enjoying my time with Mario, but neither of us can understand what we're saying." I said, "Is that important?" And Ava said, "It is rather, I'd like to get to know him better." know what he's saying to me. And that's when I got dragged in as a translator, because Mario did speak French, so did I. So she became sort of a translator for them during their affair. And Jack Cardiff had this to say about Mario. He was a nice man, didn't speak more than 3 words of English, but he was very genuinely in love with her, I think. And he wanted to show off a bit, and he had a private showing in the bull ring for Ava. And I was there. He got his bull out, and she was there watching him, and he did his thing. This mariposa, the butterfly, where he holds out the cape behind him and walks backwards, which is the most dangerous move. It's almost suicidal, but he was trying to show off. Ava was really terrified that he would be killed, and she was still upset about it after, and he did it very well. He was quite brave, but I don't think he realized what he was getting into with Ava, and she was too much of a handful for him. Wow, too much of a handful for a Spaniard. He would write poems in Spanish about her and read them, and she was very naughty because she would say things to him in English, knowing that he did not understand, and some of the things she said could be pretty mocking. I'm not surprised. Cabré was particularly eager to share his feelings for the beautiful American with any and all available members of the press. After working for a fortnight with Ava, I know she is the woman. That's what she said. After working for a fortnight with Ava, I know she is the woman I love with all my heart and soul. He claimed, a journalist. Many times I've been gored by El Toro, but Ava, she has struck me deeper than any horn of the bull, here in my heart. Oh, my Ava, from your fingers caresses sprout, your lips give rapture. And one of the Spanish tabloids had this quote. It said, "This is a real romance, not a film." That was the title. So now we get to the Sinatra stuff, the juicy stuff. Sinatra arrived suddenly and unexpectedly, recalled Jeannie Simmons. And there was a problem. Ava was not on the location where she was supposed to be. She and Mario had gone off on their own somewhere and couldn't be found, and somebody came to me. The publicist, I think, said, "What are we going to do?" He said, "We can't let him go to the location because everyone told him Ava is there and she isn't." So they sent me to intercept him, Frank, and keep him from finding out she was with Mario. So I did. I met him and took him around to the various spots, and I'm quite sure he knew exactly what was going on, but he gave no indication. He was really nice to me, even when it got to the point of desperation, and I was taking him to meet the electricians and the Spanish crew. So then they tried to get him to sing, and he said no. And then finally someone had managed to find Ava and got her away from Mario. And finally she showed up saying, "Oh, what a lovely surprise. Darling, how great." Psh, cheating on her man. Mario Cabré, meanwhile, had been talking to the press again. This is when Frank was there. And he said, "Who is Sinatra? When he is gone, I will be back with divine Ava. Our love will survive, because she's the kind of woman you dream of. But in her case, when you wake up, the dream continues." And then he had to say this, or Sinatra had this to say about Mario. He said, "This bullfighter is nothing to her. Nothing. This girl is very upset because she's had nothing to do with this boy. The Spanish press has tried to make a hero out of this guy. It would be a feather in their cap if they could claim that he had Ava interested in him. As a matter of fact, and off the record, we're closer now than we've ever been. We've kept this as clean as anybody could, just so nobody could hit below the belt. We were all..." So he's basically, he's had enough of the Spanish tabloids. Frank was going crazy. He was mad. And then when they were filming the bullfight scene, Mario had this to say. He said, Perhaps today I'm going to die for Ava Gardner. And then Hawksworth, I can't remember what his part was in the film, said, "We shot the bullfight exactly as it was happening. There was no planning or faking anything." He fought the bull right there in front of the public because they had allowed the public in that town in Spain to go for free, which is very cool, to the bullfight. He fought the bull right there in front of the public, and everything went well until the last bit when the bull and the matador meet each other face to face. And the bull got too close and knocked him over. It turned around right away and charged him. It went right onto him with the horns down, and I thought, oh no, that's the end of him. The bull's going to rip him into pieces. And I thought, and I'll get the blame. But he did not die. He dies in the movie from the bull, but not here. And also, apparently Frank called all the time on the set asking about Ava. She just did what she wanted. I do have some pictures from the movie I can show you. And interestingly enough, I didn't mention earlier that Man Ray, the famous painter, had originally painted the painting of Pandora, but the director Albert Lewin, who was friends with Man Ray, he turned down the painting, and you can see the painting right here. Let me try. I'm not I kind of like that Man Ray one more than the one used in the film. And then we have pictures on set. There's the director and Ava. And there's Mario. And here's a really cool picture of Ava and James Mason on set. I assume at the beach because she's in a bikini. And the final thing I know is that James Mason's wife was on set the whole time, and she basically wouldn't let her husband leave her side because she was always worried that Ava Gardner would try to take her husband from her, which I don't blame her because Ava was wild. So that's all the history I have for this movie. Like I said, I hope I did this movie justice in these two reviews because it's really important to me. Because not much really is online about this movie. So I wanted to put as much as I could. Like I said, there's a lot more in this book, but I wanted to get the juicy stuff out for you all. I hope you enjoyed this mega review, and I hope you love Pandora and the Flying Dutchman just as much as I do. Have a good night, everyone.